So we got an Instagram question from a Georgia Bridley.
Yes, at Georgia Bridley.
At Georgia Bridley. Basically just asking us to talk about greenwashing and snowboarding.
And eco-friendly snowboards.
Yeah, and eco-friendly snowboards. So this is definitely my forte. I am currently going to school for sustainability. I know a fair amount about this whole topic, basically. And I'll basically start with the conclusion on this one. And more or less the conclusion is I would rather see greenwashing of the industry than no eco-friendly stories at all. I think in the long run, the marketability of green product and sustainable products is in the long run a benefit to everyone, more than it is any sort of detriment because of greenwashing. Like there are going to be those brands out there that aren't really making any sort of true efforts to push any sort of sustainability program, and are just using that to cash in. But the marketing viability behind it is definitely motivating more companies to do legitimate pieces behind it. Burton is one of the snow sports industry companies that's doing one of the more ambitious. They're very ambitious with their sustainability program. They're doing a lot. And then you have companies like Niche.
Well, no one ever talks about venture.
Right.
Here's the thing about venture.
Yeah.
So the way that they do everything, like all their core millings and stuff, they use that to heat the furnace at their factory to heat the factory.
Right.
So they're like just trying to...
Their waste stays in factory.
Yeah. They've just figured out a way to have less waste in there and stuff. And you're seeing it with bigger brands that do like that base swap. So if it's a die cut and it's black and white, the other one will be white and black.
Yep.
And you're seeing more and more of that every year, and you're seeing more companies starting to use the bioresin, like the Entropy and whatnot.
Which is funny. I actually had a conversation with one of the Solomon ski dudes, and I asked him about that, if they had made any efforts, because he was talking about their, they figured out a way to minimize their packaging on their rental skis, blah, blah, blah. So I asked him if they had experimented with any of the bioresins, and he just said they're not scalable. In which case I said, yes, they are. That's what Burton uses.
Yeah.
Every single one of their boards has a bioresin. And now there's two different stories with bioresin. So there's bioresins that don't use caustic chemicals and use less water and aren't nearly as harmful in the environment. And then there's the stuff, Burton calls it re-res. I think that might be the brand name on it, basically. Niche used it before Burton did.
Yeah, it's the one
Burton is using it in some of their family tree stuff.
It's the stuff that'll break down. Like you can pull everything apart.
Yeah, you can actually just submerge the entire snowboard into a solution. It breaks down the glue into something that's essentially
and let's
recyclable.
Be honest, Niche is the first.
Niche was the first, right?
Niche was the first.
And honestly, Niche was one of the first people to get a viable bioresin that made the snowboards good. We played around with it when I was working at Signal, and the stuff just didn't have the hold to it.
That's one of the issues with bioresin. They're perfecting it every year, but the first couple generations, they weren't as strong.
No, they just weren't as good.
They would just blow apart.
Yeah.
And then they started putting more rubber into it, I guess, to make it like
they had a higher elasticity than standard resin, which...
great for jib boards.
Yeah, it was great for jib boards. Like the Niche New back then I thought it was awesome personally. But so there's companies out there like Niche that are using, they're at the Mothership, which is a zero carbon emission factory.
True.
It uses a ton of their, Mothership may or may not have their issues, but their sustainability story is genuine and really good. It is genuinely really good. All of their heating, all of their energy comes from the river that's right there.
Yep.
And it's an extremely high tech situation. And then on top of that, Niche is using, they use a ton of basalt instead of fiberglass. They're using, they've used hemp before instead of carbon, because it has a similar tensile strength when you lay it up in a resin matrix.
It does, but it doesn't have that same rebound.
It's not. It's an organic. It's then more organic, like bamboo.
Yeah.
Or they're using bamboo. Like we're starting to see a lot more companies use this kind of materials. I know Solomon Skis going into 2020 replaced Koroyd, which is plastic, for cork, which I've always been a huge fan of cork. I think if you use it right, you just have to pick and choose where you put it in.
Yeah,
stuff.
Solomon's used it in the past because I can remember like the grip, and I think maybe the first generation Assassin, but I know the grip for sure had it.
The Assassin still has it.
Does it still?
Yeah, Assassin.
But I can remember when I had a grip that had it underfoot. It was great for dampening, but I'll tell you what, the thing could not like charging flat based. It was great, but if you got it on edge, it wouldn't grip. And which is funny because the board was called the Grip.
It's called the Grip, and
but it freaking only had about this much surface area, and the rest of it was all just rock. It was crazy.
It is a paddleboard.
It was.
Cork as a material, I think, is going to see a growth soon as we start to get better at using it, and our production capabilities are getting closer to being able to use it. We're going to start to see it go into cores instead of just sidewalls for dampening. It's going to go into cores for dampening or for vibration dampening. But so we're starting to see companies move more towards those directions. There's definitely companies out there that push the green story, and realistically they're putting just as much plastic into the industry as they are recycling it.
They are, or my favorite is they're shipping equipment all over the world, and they're not, or they're buying green credits. They're just buying.
And that's the other big thing is when a company will tell you, we're zero carbon emissions. What they can do is literally buy carbon credits that qualify as being able to say that they offset their carbon emissions. And then you have brands like Arbor, for instance, that when they say they've offset their, carbon emissions plus all of their retailers, it's because they've replanted a massive amount of the koa forests on the Big Island in Hawaii.
Yeah.
So they've literally added foliage that's going to soak up CO2. So their carbon footprint really is negative because of how much plant growth that they've actually created, essentially. Right. So kind of goes both ways. At the end of the day, snowboarding is not green.
No.
It never will be.
It never will be. And I want to touch on something, too, especially being in Vail Resort's backyard, because Breckenridge tries to tout this whole, we're a super green, we recycle, we do, like, the whole town. I'm not talking the resort, the town. I want people to know that most of the recycling actually ends up in the landfill here. They don't have the capacity. I've had friends that have volunteered. They don't have the capacity, or it gets tainted because so many people just throw their trash in there.
Yep.
It ends up at the garbage dump outside Keystone. So for all you people that are driving to Keystone, when the mountain's on your right and you look to the left, right when all the new condos are, right up behind there, up the dirt road, is the dump. It's the county dump. So that's another thing. Like all these resorts that are like, oh, we're zero carbon and we're doing this. I'm like, you're going to tell me you're zero when those cats are firing up that diesel and blowing that smog, or when your power goes out and you're running the generator to run the chairlift at the top? No, you're not. You're buying carbon credits. You're doing that until you go full solar to run everything, and you figure out how to make a solar cat. You're still running diesel. Snowmobiles cost gas, everything like that, There's a reason that they have volunteer days. They do this here in Breck for the resort. They have a volunteer day to go clean up underneath the chairlifts. Like you literally go up there. They give you a bag.
Trash that sits underneath the chairlifts at the end of the season.
Yeah,
it's
insane. It's insane.
Yeah.
Like
And that's the other big thing, and something that if you want to have an impact on, your personal sustainability, recycling, you touched on it, is the contamination to it. Like, 8% of what actually gets sent to recycling factories can be recycled.
Yeah, it's too contaminated.
Right.
I'll tell you what's cool is there's a guy in Europe that has figured out how to way to reverse plastics back into oil. And they're still in the early phases of it. I was watching a documentary on it, but he literally turned on the tap and he's like, it's gasoline. He's like, it's 93 octane. I'm like, Jesus. Yeah. It's high-ass octane.
Right.
But they're figuring it out. He's like, it's great because that you can get some of the plastics in which we really, literally, the human that invented the marketing behind bottled waters should be cursed to hell.
Yes.
Because like bottled water bottles end up everywhere, but we're all guilty of it. There's not much we can say about it. As much as we use reusables, we still do that. I think
situations, it's really fucking hard to avoid.
Yeah, and but the same thing with snowboards. Like snowboards are not biodegradable to an extent. Like there's stuff that will, but there's so much that won't. I mean, the best thing you can do is figure out how to repurpose your old equipment.
Right. And there are companies out there that do that. Vail's had programs here and there they've partnered with for recycling that basically gets shipped up, and some of the stuff, depending on what the gear itself actually is, some of the stuff will get turned into like play mats for kids' playgrounds, or it'll get chipped up and turned into like just like mulch basically, and they can use it for other stuff. And out there they just destroy it basically.
Use it for insulation, things like that.
Like that kind of thing. They can, so that it is repurposable for sure. The hard thing is making it cost effective.
Yeah.
That's really the biggest thing that holds up a lot of this kind of stuff is just the cost effectiveness of it. I mean, that's a huge part of it. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot you can do personally, and like I said at the very beginning of this segment, I think while there are certainly companies out there using the greenwashing story as a benefit to them, and they're not actually doing anything truly beneficial, I think in the long run it's going to motivate enough companies to actually do real beneficial stuff that in the long run I think it's a benefit. I think it's a good thing.
No, you start with these baby steps, and then it grows and it grows and it grows, and then eventually it becomes the commonplace.
Right.
And that's what we need. I mean, it's not something you're going to see take hold in a year or two, but 10, 15, 20 years? Yeah. And that's what you want. Yep. You want it to do that because, unless something drastic happens overnight where you can do this, it doesn't. But, you see companies trying to claim that they're a green company because they're using water-based inks. You're doing that too because chances are it's probably fucking cheaper.
Yeah, and on top of that, like, using water-based inks sounds great, but the dyeing process is a massive water usage.
Yeah.
It's not great. The one that I like to see as far as dyeing is concerned is Burton is using a process called dry dye, where they're using liquid CO2. It's a higher cost, but it uses I think 30% less water in order to make that garment. And over the if they can get to a point where they can do that for all of their garments, that's a massive decrease in their water usage, a 30% decrease with all the outerwear and clothing that they make. That's huge. So that's the kind of stuff that we really need to see. And my best advice to you is if you are concerned with this issue is just get educated. That's one of the biggest things when it comes to sustainability or the environment is people just aren't educated on it at all. They don't understand what they're looking at. And, like you said, that's the perfect example of it is saying, oh, we use water-based inks. That doesn't actually necessarily mean it's good. It just maybe sounds good because you know that water's not harmful. That's all you know. But you don't know how much water they're using, and is the volume of water they're using harmful? Because that could be the case.
Right. And the ecology behind it is so...
There's a lot bigger impact to it than just the chemical itself or the process itself. It's how the process affects the people that are using it. It's how the raw materials are sourced. It's how the labor that's sourcing the raw materials is handled. So, and that's why, one of the ones that I really encourage people to pay attention to, and Patagonia has always been very good about pushing this. Burton has a higher percentage of it than Patagonia does, but is Blue Sign.
Yes.
And FSC. Those two are fantastic for sustainability because they're not only... some of the criteria is not only the environmental friendly piece, but also the social sustainability piece.
Right.
To making sure that the workers and the labor routes and all of that from start to finish, that very, very start life of that product from the very beginning to the very end is all certified by a third-party company that has nothing to do with the companies that they're certifying. Right. So those two things are huge. The FSC and the Blue Sign is essentially on the clothing side. So if you see those labels, know that that's genuine sustainability product and not just greenwashing.
Right.
But yeah, that's kind of that story.
Yeah, I don't really think there's much more we can touch on with that. So.
No.